In 1692, pirates sailed the seven seas and witches allegedly flew the skies. While down on Earth, scientists, philosophers, and artists made astounding breakthroughs. Welcome to The Thing About Salem. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
Hello, and I'm Sarah Jack. We are descendants of women hanged for witchcraft. Today, we leave Salem for a special field trip.
We're traveling around the world to see what else was happening in 1692.
What was this era all about? What important people and discoveries can we find on our trip?
1692 fell within what is now known as the early modern period, a time of transition and colonization, when exploration and scientific discovery opened up a wider world than what was possible before. Unfortunately, this gave rise to much colonization and religious imperialism.
By 1692, 200 years after Columbus sailed to the Americas, Europeans had colonized much of North and South America and were busy fighting over other people's homelands, forcing religious conversions and engaging in widespread ethnic cleansing.
In 1682, France had claimed the entire drainage basin of the Mississippi River, a large area running from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico and from the Appalachians to the Rockies. Massachusetts was part of the British Empire, connected by trade and governance to one of Europe's most sophisticated cultural centers, London. Ships regularly crossed the Atlantic. Books were imported. News traveled. The colonies weren't cut off. They were just very different.
So what was happening in the wider world while Salem was consumed by witch trials? In London, Henry Purcell was composing The Fairy Queen, his longest theatrical work. Theaters were thriving after recovering from plague closures and Puritan shutdowns. And mathematical laws explaining the physical universe, Newton's Principia, was still being absorbed in 1687.
Meanwhile, in Massachusetts, there were no theaters because Puritans banned them as sinful. There was no music beyond simple psalm singing. Instruments were both too expensive and considered frivolous. There was no art beyond gravestone carving. There was one printing press in Cambridge producing mostly sermons and religious tracts. And people were being executed for invisible spectral crimes.
Massachusetts and London were the same English-speaking world under the same King William III. But London had elaborate musical compositions explaining human emotion through sound, scientific explanations for how the universe works, and packed theaters for entertainment.
While Massachusetts had war trauma, religious restrictions on cultural expression, and witch trials using spectral evidence. Invisible, unprovable testimony.
Isn't it ironic that while Newton was proving that the physical world operates by mathematical laws, Salem was executing people based on dreams and visions? While Purcell was creating beauty from imagination, Massachusetts was killing people for having the wrong kind of imagination. Two versions of 1692, one world moving toward enlightenment, reason, and artistic expression, while the other one was gripped by fear and supernatural explanations.
Same empire, completely different realities.
In New England in 1692, the English were at war with the French and the Wabanaki Confederacy, an alliance of 5 Native American nations from Dawnland, where the light of the morning first touched New England and southeastern Canada. The English fought what they called King William's War in northern New England, chiefly in Maine and New Hampshire, from 1688 to 1697.
On January 24th, 1692, French and Wabanaki forces raided York, Maine, killing some 100 English colonists and taking another 80 captive. York's minister, Shubael Dummer, was killed and mutilated. Captain John Flood was unable to bring his militia force up from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, in time to intervene, and he was accused of witchcraft in May, a reflection of frustration with the losses suffered in the war.
In addition to warfare, New Englanders had to contend with piracy. 1692 fell right in the middle of the golden age of piracy, when characters like Captain William Kidd plied New England waters.
Back in Old England, The English were at war on multiple fronts. On one hand, they were fighting the 9 Years' War against France.
On the other hand, they were contending with Jacobites in Scotland and Ireland who wanted the line of King James II restored to the throne. He had been deposed in November 1688 in the Glorious Revolution when his daughter Mary II and his nephew, her husband, William III, seized the throne. James II chose exile in France.
In Scotland, the Jacobite Rising of 1689 continued into February 1692, when soldiers under Captain Robert Campbell attacked the MacDonald clan in Glencoe, Scotland, massacring 38 and forcing more than 40 others to retreat into the mountains in winter, where they succumbed to the elements.
In Europe in the late 17th century, we see the same continuous warfare that had marked the continent for centuries. Nevertheless, the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment were underway.
Sir Isaac Newton published his theory of gravitation, his laws of motion, and many other mind-blowing discoveries in his 1687 masterpiece, Principia. For many, the publication of Principia marks the beginning of the scientific revolution.
John Locke, the great philosopher of the Enlightenment, published 3 masterworks in 1689 and 1690, a letter concerning toleration, 2 treatises of government, and an essay concerning human understanding. So those came out right before the Salem witch trials.
That enlightened thinking was already available to the people of Massachusetts in 1692. And if you're familiar with Boyle's law, having to do with chemicals and pressure, the man who defined it, Robert Boyle, had just died on December 31st, 1691.
London, which had been obliterated by plague and fire in 1665 and 1666, was still on the rebound in 1692, but theaters were thriving after recovering from plague closures and Puritan shutdowns.
In 1692, the great English composer Henry Purcell first presented his semi-opera, The Fairy Queen, an adaptation of Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. The Fairy Queen premiered on May 2nd, 1692, the very same day that Minister George Burroughs was arrested for witchcraft in Maine and transported to Salem.
Far south of New England, but closely connected by trade, Jamaica was devastated by a massive earthquake in June 1692. This happened the same week that Bridget Bishop went to trial. This powerful tremor and the tsunami it generated sank much of the island below sea level and killed an estimated 2,000 people. Another 3,000 people soon died of injury or disease.
In 1692, New Spain was rocked by the Mexico City corn riots, an uprising led by indigenous people against a regime obsessed with racial purity, which was speculating on the price of corn during a time of food shortages.
Meanwhile, in New Mexico, Spain was reconquering the Pueblo nations, which had forced the Spanish out in 1680.
Elsewhere in Europe, the Sun King, Louis XIV, continued to reign in France. He would spend more than 72 years as monarch, the longest recorded rule of any monarch in history.
In China, the Kangxi Emperor was also in the middle of a long reign, as he would remain in office 61 years. In 1692, he signed an Edict of Toleration for Christians.
And in India, the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb was in the 34th of 48 years in power. During his reign, India moved past China to become the world's largest economy.
In the 17th century, East India companies, particularly the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company, dominated trade between Europe and Asia. These were powerful, almost nation-like entities which had their own imperialistic militaries. In 1686, Britain's East India Company decided to start the First Anglo-Indian War. By 1690, the leaders of the company in India were begging for mercy from Aurangzeb.
In conclusion, the 17th century was a time marked by great change, as vestiges of medieval society were still being shed in favor of modernization. The Salem witch trials occurred in a period of great upheaval when the very laws of the universe were being questioned and kingdoms were consolidating into nations with greater centralized power.
Witch trials were on their way out for a variety of reasons, including greater judicial skepticism and centralization of judicial systems. However, 1692 was not the end of witchcraft accusations or trials by any means.
We're now offering an in-depth look at the Salem Witch Trials through our Salem Witch Trials daily videos and podcast course. It's free and it's available on YouTube and Spotify with a weekly blog and workbook available on our website, aboutsalem.com, including a youth edition worksheet.
This week on the Salem Witch Trials Daily, we will talk about witch trials outside of Salem, including some held much later. We're setting up the context needed to understand what happened in Salem day by day. Welcome to Salem Witch Trials Daily YouTube course.
You're about to embark on something unique. We've spent years researching the Salem Witch Trials from primary sources, and now we're bringing you the story day by day in a video course that follows the actual timeline of the 1692 and 1693 history.
Each daily video is bite-sized, just a few minutes covering what happened on that day or exploring key topics that help you understand the context. You can watch as we release them or binge a full week at once.
Here's what makes this different. We've built a full course around these videos that will grow your expertise. Whether you want to just watch casually or dive deep with assignments and activities, you can engage at whatever level works for you.
Every week, we release Standard Edition and Student Edition workbooks and a blog post on aboutsalem.com. The blog recaps the week's content and gives you the big picture. The workbook is where the real learning happens if you want to go deeper.
The workbook has fill-in-the-blank summaries, reflection questions, vocabulary building, quote scavenger hunts, and 4 weekly challenges. You'll make predictions, practice citing evidence, write character journals, and share what you've learned.
We also have a weekly podcast, The Thing About Salem, that explores topics beyond the daily timeline. The workbook includes optional activities for the podcast episode too.
As you progress, you earn achievement badges you can share on social media. Start with hashtag Salem Daily Student. Track your weekly progress with hashtag Salem Week 1, hashtag Salem Week 2, and work toward mid-course badges like Salem Daily Researcher and completion badges like hashtag Salem Daily Grad.
And here's something special. If you're descended from someone involved in the Salem Witch Trials, like we are, we have a parallel descendant track with its own badges and recognitions. You can honor your family's connection while learning the history.
No matter when you're watching this, you can start anytime and work at your own pace. All the published videos, blogs, and workbooks are always available. We're releasing them weekly following the 1692 timeline during 2026 to 2027. But you don't have to keep up. Go at your own speed.
Head to aboutsalem.com to download this week's workbook and read the blog. All the resources, recommended books, and ways to support this nonprofit work are linked there.
This is a 75-week journey covering all of 1692 and 1693. Whether you're doing the full course or just following along, you're part of a community exploring this history together.
So welcome. We're glad you're here. Let's dive into the Salem Witch Trials together.
See you tomorrow.